Hi YouTube, I'm Aiman. Welcome back to one of my auto repair videos. Today I'm going to show you how to remove and install the inverter coolant pump. Now this is a bit of a unique video. Instead, we usually do a removing and then an installation of a part, but this time we're just going to do an installation, and through reverse engineering, you should be able to figure out how to remove it. Now, first, before we begin, by the way, it goes here. Before we begin on how to actually install it, let's talk about what the inverter coolant pump does. So we have a diagram right here, which is of the inverter cooling system. So for a Toyota Prius 2004-2009, which this car is, it has two separate cooling systems. So one is for the main engine, which we have a diagram right here. Don't get this confused. This isn't the other one. And then it also has an inverter cooling system, which is right here. Now, this is a diagram of both the systems together. So here's a basic summary of how the inverter cooling system works. We did a lot of research of this, countless hours of it. So this is basically a summary of it. So first off, the coolant or water starts in the reservoir, which is right here. This reservoir is separate from the reservoir that's used for the main engine. So the water or coolant from the reservoir goes down to the water pump. And then from the water pump, it goes down to the transmission. And then it cools down the transmission because the transmission is going to be hot. And then from the transmission, it goes to the radiator. Now, an interesting thing to note about the radiator is that a part of it is used for the inverter, and part of it is used for the engine. Now, a majority of it is used for the engine, as seen here. So, like this top 3/5, and a part of it is used for the radiator, which is this bottom 2/5. And from this radiator, the warm coolant or water will cool down, and then it will go through a hose to the inverter. And after it goes through the inverter to cool it down, it then goes back to the reservoir. So that's basically a summary of how the inverter cooling system works. So I'm sorry about that. I know a lot of people don't just like to skip the explanations, but I just want to say that if you're working on a car, especially a Prius like this, you shouldn't be fixing it if you're not going to listen to how it works. So now let's get to looking at the pump itself. So the reason that we removed the pump was so that we could access this area right here for a separate reason, which was to remove the coolant control valve. That's a separate video. Go check that out if you want. But now we have to install it. So let's just look at it. So there's two places for hoses to go into. 1, 2. And then there's 3 places for bolts to go into. 1, 2, and 3. Now let me just talk about these bolts for a second. So they're a bit wiggly because when a pump works, it needs to vibrate. So that's why they're wiggling. So when you put the bolts in, even when it's tight, it's still going to be a bit wiggly. I like using that word because the pump needs to vibrate. And finally, there is a housing or a harness for a cable. Now, the way that these bolts go in is intuitive. Now, this is the only orientation that it can go in, that it fits. And you can't put it in this direction because then this hole will not fit and this hole won't align properly. You can't put it this way because it just actually doesn't fit the rest of the car. So this means that the only way that this is possible is in this orientation. Right, so the first step that we're going to do is put the bolts on. And if you're taking this out, then you should assume that taking the bolts out is last. And that kind of makes sense because you're not going to be able to take out the hoses if you're not able to get leverage on them. So first we're just going to insert them and then just screw them a bit. Only a bit before you tighten them. Actually, let me just make sure it's aligned. So you're going to want to look from the top. So from the top, and you just want to make sure that the hole is aligned correctly. Then you want to put one of the bolts in. Just screw it in by hand for like 5 threads or so. Alright, so it's wiggly right now. And then you want to put the other 2 bolts in. Want to make sure from the top that it's aligned. And then you should put the last one in. Now, if one of the bolts isn't fitting correctly, that means that you put it in the wrong orientation. So you have to figure that out, which should be easy. So the last one goes in the end. This one should naturally just go into its place. And now that it's spit all the way, we're going to by hand put it down all the way, screw it down all the way, and then after that we're going to tighten it using a socket wrench with, I guess you would say, a torque bar. You know, because we don't want to tighten it too much, because in our past experience we've actually over tightened the bolts. We actually did it when taking out the coolant control valve, and we ended up breaking them. And let's see, I don't think we we ended up breaking them, as you can see right here. So you don't want to tighten it too much, especially if you have rusted bolts, kind of like it looks like we have here. So now we're going to do it by hand all the way. Alright, so let me just correct myself. So I said this was a torque bar. It's not a torque bar. It's just a extender. I think it's a 1/4 inch extender. And that's as opposed to an extender like here, which is 3/8 of an inch. Now, the reason that we're putting less force on it with a tool like this is because of the ratchet wrench right here. Because if it's smaller, we're only able to put less force on it. So like 30 foot-pounds, I think it was. On a bigger socket wrench like this, or ratchet wrench, it would be probably 100 foot-pounds if you're strong enough. So this allows us to limit the amount of force that we put on it. Even if we break the bolts, it's alright because we have a bit of spares. So hopefully not. Alright, let me just make sure this is spinning the right direction. And let's go. Alright, so I switched to a 4-inch extender instead of a 6-inch because we might be testing the limits of this of the space that we have if we use a 6-inch. So now we're just going to tighten it. I already tightened it by hand. So right now, it looks like just a bit more. Okay, so now it feels tight. Okay, so I'm not gonna tighten it too much. I'm gonna have my dad check it out later. I guess I didn't tighten this enough. Just make sure you tighten it all the way so that you save more time, and so that your ratchet actually works. Okay, so it looks like it's getting a bit tighter. Okay, so I'm gonna have my dad check that out later. And finally, this one in the back. This one's gonna be a bit hard. You might want to switch to a 2-inch or 3-inch extender if you have one. And it's getting already tighter. And okay, they're all tight now. Alright, so as you can see, we've made sure that the bolts are tightened. And don't panic if it's wiggly. It's designed that way because it's a pump and it's supposed to vibrate. I think I said that like twice. But now we're going to be moving on to installing the pumps or connecting them. Now, if you're removing the pumps, then I guess it's going to be taking out the hoses instead. So first off, let's talk about the location of these hoses. So they're very intuitive. So this bottom hose, you actually can't confuse it because it's kind of difficult to even get it onto the top. So that means that this hose right here must go onto this bottom opening. This top opening corresponds to this hose. This hose will be usually inside this fitting, right? And it will also be in this fitting right here. So we also have a fluid line clamp set right here. You can get 4 of them at Harbor Freight Tools for around $8. And you don't even have to fully drain the coolant. You can just use these clamps in order to stop the coolant flow. And you don't necessarily have to bleed the system, but we recommend that you do it anyway. Alright, so now we're going to put the hoses back. We're going to start with the bottom one because it should be easier to put back first. And then if we're taking it out, that should be easier to take out last. So we're just going to slowly take this out. We're going to fix this on. I'm going to set this glove aside. Just wiggle it on. Make sure it goes all the way. Now you can tell when it's all the way when it hits the end of that notch. So it should stop right before that. Okay, so you can see that it hits the end of the notch. Next step is we're going to take this clip or this ring or this clamp that we call it, and then we're going to bring it all the way over. We're going to note its original position. We're going to take pliers. Where are they at? So pliers like this. You can use longer ones if you don't have as much of a grip. Then we're just going to fix them on. I'm just going to get a better grip of it. Alright, so neutral, the regular position looks like that. So that means I have to rotate it a lot, actually. This is a bit rusty, so it's a bit hard to even finagle it. So now, when it gets here, you can either use Glide if you don't have enough strength, or you can try to just finagle it on, which I'm going to attempt right now. Alright, so we used a bit of Glide because it is rusted. And secondarily, since this clamp is a bit unaligned, you can also use your finger to gently guide it. I wouldn't suggest putting your finger right here, because if this clamp snaps back, it might bite you, and that is not a fun time, let me tell you. Alright, so you can see that I'm making a bit of progress on it. So right here, you can also use a flathead screwdriver if you don't want to get your fingers hurt. Alright, gently guide this on and put it in its correct position. For now, we're going to leave it like this just in case we need to access it in case of leaks. So next step, we're going to release this clamp right here. In order to do, it's a bit tricky from here. Oh, never mind. So we're just going to turn this knob right here in order to release it. I think it's counterclockwise. And then after that, what we're going to do is we're going to inject coolant from the top in, from this top hole. So let me just remove this. Okay, so now we should be able to remove it. Wait. Don't we need to... Oh, never mind. You have to turn it first. So, the way that these clamps work is that you just put the hose in, turn it... no, wait. You put the hose in here, then you turn this onto it, and then you just lock it in. I just realized that now. Okay. I'm sorry. So, next step is we're going to inject coolant in there. Alright, so next step is not necessary, especially if you're taking it out. But we're going to actually inject coolant into the pump. And this is because when we put this top hose on and we release the clamp, there's going to be a pocket of air in between where the coolant that was stopped by the clamp in the other hose, this one, and this pump. So we want to minimize as many air bubbles as we can. However, we're still going to be bleeding using this bleeding valve right here after this. So, as a precaution. So, the way a syringe works is... Okay, so it goes like this. So I'm not sure it's going to fit. Okay. That is what the coolant looks like. Really mesmerizing, actually. And now we just want to inject until it reaches the top. Shouldn't overflow. You don't want to waste some coolant. And if it doesn't reach the top fully, then just refill your coolant. Okay, so I guess it wasn't refilled entirely. Okay, I see the coolant coming up at the top. Just a bit more. And now we should be able to put the second hose on. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. So we're going to take this. And this is going to be we're going to angle it under here. Under this bracket right here. And now I'm trying to minimize the amount of coolant that we lose and the amount of air bubbles therefore. So it looks like the best way to do this is to, when you take this off, quickly put it on. So my dad did a really good job of making sure that this doesn't fall. And all the while... Okay, so let me just set that aside and put this back on. So you don't want to expose it to too much open air. And then you just put it back on. There's no noticeable... Okay, so the notch is right here. You'll see it when you remove it. But there's going to be a notch right here, and it's going to end right at that notch. So the next step is, like last time, to put the clamps back on. Just remember that if you're doing it in this reverse, you just have to take the clamps off. No, not take the clamps off, but put them off to the side. Alright, so now we're going to finagle our clamp back in. This is one's also rusted, so it's going to be a bit tricky. Alright, I have to make note of its original position too. Its original position looks like. So I'm going to angle this just a bit so I can see it. Because there's like a bit of like an outline where the rest formed. So, oh, it's actually parallel to what this looks like right now, so. This one's also a bit misaligned, so you want to sort of gently guide it if you need to. And if it moves towards this way, you're going to want to move it back to the correct position. Oh, this is going to be a bit hard to angle. Okay, this one looks like a good angle for the light. You're going to have a lot of battles with the light if you're ever working on cars. Just know that. Okay. So now we're going to turn this back to its original position. And in that case, we gotta use a different... Or do it from the top, actually. See, car maintenance requires a lot of finagling. Jeez. This is probably going to be sped up in editing process anyway. Okay. So now it's in the right position, and using this plier is actually much more easier, so I'm going to use this. Make sure that's tight. Then just gently guide it down. And put it back to its original position. I can see the outline. You guys probably can't. But there we go. It's in the original outline. Make sure this is tight. And finally, the next step is that if you are installing it, then you're going to want to remove the clamp. This one's counterclockwise as well. Spin this around. This one. And finally, you should be able to twist it out and just sort of gently guide it out. And that's what the clamps look like. Alright, so next step, and the last thing we're going to do on this pump, is just to connect the cable. And I guess that would be one of your first steps when taking out the pump. So, it's easy. You just have to make sure it's aligned correctly. So, you can see that the way it's oriented, that there is a ridge on the bottom that's meant for this notch right here. And plus, even if you put it the other way, it is not going to fit because there isn't a notch on this side for these two ridges out here. So let me just try demonstrating what it looks like if you put it in the wrong way. And you can't put it in the wrong way. So we're going to put it in the right orientation. And there we go. Now, I guess after this you could just put these hoses back in their correct harnesses. For like this one goes in this clip and this one goes in that clip right here. We still have a bit more work to do on this car, so we're not going to do that just yet. But you can do that if you want. And that brings us to the final step, or I guess the first step if you're removing it. And that is how to put the outside on. So there are two methods for how to how to access the pump. The first one is more simpler, and that is to remove this bracket right here. There's 3 bolts, 1 here and 2 here. And then you just lift it up, and then you can, it's a bit tighter, but you can still get access to all 3 bolts from here and the hoses. And the second method, which is much more popular and easier to work with, is removing the headlights. Now, removing the headlights is fairly easy. So first off, there are 1, 2, and 3 holes for bolts or fasteners. And they correspond to this hole. So that's the top one. And then if we pull this panel back, they correspond, but you can see it from here. They correspond to this hole. But from here you can also see it. And finally, there is the hole right here that corresponds to this hole. So after you've taken bolts out of all 3 of those holes. You just need to loosen this panel. So once we loosened all the bolts, now we can take it out. But before we do that, we're going to turn our attention to the back. We're going to notice that there are 3 things that we're going to need to take out. First off, the halogen, the part that connects to the halogen bulbs. Then there is the part that connects to the signal bulb. And finally, the marker. Alright, so first off, for the marker, you can either take the wire or the harness out. So it's just a simple pull. For the harness, it's just a twist and pull. And for the signal, you also just twist and pull, or just pull it out. And finally, for this one, is just a simple pull it out. We're going to do a separate video on how to remove these when we do a video on how to replace the headlight bulbs. So go check that out in the future. So for our purpose, the purpose of this video, we're done now. So I do recommend, however, that you check out the video on how to bleed the system, because the inverter converter is around $3,000 to $4,000 if you break it and you have to replace it. So if you don't bleed it, and in our case we're comfortable because we refilled the coolant, but if you don't bleed it, there might be air bubbles, and that's going to end up in, because the inverter converter needs to be cooled down, that's going to end up in it malfunctioning it, and you have to replace it. So I do recommend that you check out the video on how to bleed it, and I guess that's it. I'm Aiman, and thanks for watching. Please like or comment, subscribe, look at videos on EyeOnAiman, especially videos on the Toyota Prius. We're doing a lot of them, actually. And also that bleeding video, like I said. And I guess that's it. I'll see you then, and signing out. Peace.